Tonight with one of the great frustrations of flying, figuring out ticket pricing. What you paid for your seat may be drastically different than the price paid by the person sitting right next to you. And it turns out some of the biggest differences in price are found right here in Charlotte. Right around Memorial Day, the travel news and deals website Thrifty Traveler reported that the biggest airlines were often sticking it to those who book one way and are flying alone. Here's one example that they found. This is an American Airlines flight from this fall from Charlotte to Fort Myers. A one-way economy ticket for a solo flyer was $422. If you bought two tickets, however, it was just $266 a piece. And basic economy, that was even cheaper, $231.
All three of the major airlines were doing it, American, Delta, and United. You know, what we've seen since is that both Delta and United have stopped doing this. They pulled the fares that push solo travelers into a pricier ticket. American is not only the only major U.S. airline still doing it, they are by far the most egregious user of this kind of a tactic.
Which means with Charlotte being an American hub, travelers here are some of the most impacted. The Thrifty Traveler, in fact, found that 2/3 of solo flyers booking those one-way flights out of Charlotte were hit with a higher fare. It was the highest percentage among the 4 American airline hubs that were searched. So we're talking Charlotte, Philadelphia, Miami, and Dallas. Which begs the question, why are they doing this?
You know, the airlines are not commenting about this. They have declined to comment, not just to me, but to CNN, to the Washington Post. I mean, you could go down the list. They aren't talking about it. So we're really just left to speculate. But, you know, you don't have to go far into the annals of airfare pricing to know that what airlines try to do is they try to get more money out of business travelers. But the problem here is an obvious one, that, you know, business travelers are not the only people who are booking just one ticket. There are solo travelers. There are friends who plan a group trip but book their airfare separately. There are people that need to rush off somewhere to respond to a family member's medical emergency and book a one-way ticket because they don't know when they're going to be able to come home.
So you mentioned the airlines, American not really saying anything officially about this, but you did get a little insight perhaps, right, from the former CEO.
Yeah, so, you know, kind of the week after this story made national headlines, former American Airlines CEO Doug Parker went on the Airlines Confidential podcast, which is a big industry insider podcast that gets a lot of, big names from the airline industry. And he, for lack of a better word, said this is much ado about nothing, that airlines always do things like this. And that, yes, this is a way for, airlines to charge business travelers higher fares. Yet in the next breath, he seemed to suggest that, well, what they're not actually charging business travelers more, they're charging groups less. You can't have it both ways. It's one or the other. And second, I think, the last 4 or 5 decades of the airline industry since deregulation shows us that the airlines will go out of their way to charge people more. They don't do this to cut the general American traveling public a good deal. Airlines are publicly traded for-profit companies whose sole purpose is to turn a profit.
Well, and as you pointed out, there's a lot of reasons people are flying solo, not just for business reasons.
Right.
It does also make me wonder, has business travel rebounded? We know COVID had cratered.
It certainly looks a little bit different than it did pre-COVID. I think there are fewer overnight trips and come back the following day from Charlotte to London and Charlotte to LA or whatever. But for the most part, we know that business travel is back. Businesses are still traveling, small businesses and, large corporations alike. And so, I think clearly there's more juice for them to squeeze out of business travelers than there was certainly a couple of years ago.
Any suggestions, Kyle, for those of us who may have to travel by ourselves but aren't, relying on a business account? What can we do about this?
There are a lot of reasons why it's easier and better to book one-ways separately. First and foremost, if your plans change, it's much easier to cancel or rebook just one segment of that trip than it is to have to redo both of them. So that's a big reason why business travelers in particular may be booking one-ways separately. Booking round trip really for now is the best way to avoid this, especially in Charlotte where American really is, the big name in town.
And if you'd like to read more about this, just head to thriftytraveler.com.